Hi everyone, my name's Jordan and welcome back to my channel. Today I wanted to focus on an author that I feel like I don't talk about enough on here because I haven't been reading much of his books in the past year or two, and that is Stephen King. Everyone who's anyone has heard of Stephen King. Non-readers have heard of Stephen King. So I don't need to introduce you guys. However, what I don't talk about much on here is that I have read a lot of Stephen King books. I think I've read over 30, maybe over 40. I will say that I haven't read much recently. Most of the books I've read of his, I read in high school. I was a huge Stephen King fan in high school, and I read some in college as well. A lot of these books I haven't read in a long time. When I was curating this list, I was going through all of his books, and there were a lot of them that I was like, I think I've read this one, but I'm not sure. So if that was the case, it obviously didn't end up on this list because it wasn't memorable enough. I didn't start tracking my reading until I moved to New Jersey, which was like 5 years ago. So anything I read before that, with how good my memory is, and by good I mean how awful my memory is, I don't remember. A lot of books I read pre 5 years ago, I don't remember a lot of because I read a lot still and I didn't track it. And if it wasn't a great book, I didn't remember it. So these are the books that stood out to me, and I have ranked them, I think. I've mostly ranked them. I have 9 on this list, so I've ranked, I'm going to go from 9 to 1. I will say that some of these are very stereotypical best of Stephen King. There is one glaring book left off that almost everyone has on their best of list, and that's It. I guess It could have an honorable mention because I didn't hate it, and so let's say it's 10. Let's say it's up here as 10 as an honorable mention to my best of list. I read It, and it was probably the first book I ever read that like actually scared me a lot. I had nightmares, like it was a very scary book, so I give it kudos for that. And I did really enjoy the first part. And then after the kids all get older, I felt like we kind of lost the plot a little bit. I still think there were definitely some good moments, but it just wasn't as good to me. It wasn't as successful. But I still really think the premise is great. I mean, he's the master of horror, and this is one of the scarier of his books. So very, very good book. Just not one of my favorites. I wouldn't call it the best of. While I understand most people do, this best of list is best of to me because I am not doing this objectively. This is a very subjective list of my favorite Stephen King books. So coming in at number 9 is a Stephen King classic, and that is Carrie. Carrie is the story of a young girl who gets bullied a lot in school, and she has telekinetic powers, and she kind of goes on this like violent rampage. And it's a classic for a reason. It is a really beautiful book. It is scary. It is very introspective. I really think that while this is one of his earlier books, I think it was so well crafted. There was a Carrie the musical that was a huge flop. I think it closed on Broadway in like 3 days or something, but the music was actually really good for it. Overall, I think it's a really great installment of his. I mean, books are typically made classics for a reason, and I think that this book deserves to be in this top list. It's also one of his shorter books, so it's like a quicker read. I just think that this book was great. Next up, I have Under the Dome. This book is about a town where all of a sudden a dome like lands on the town and completely cuts them off from the world. And it's just a story of survival. And I am a sucker for stories of survival, which is why I love space operas so much. I love like humanity trying to survive in space because it's just cool. It's cool to see human ingenuity, and this book is about that. But it, of course, being Stephen King, it gets really dark. There's a lot of power plays at work, and it is, I think, just a really interesting look into the human psyche, which is kind of what Stephen King is best at. All of his books have a very simple premise, or most of his books have a very simple premise, like Carrie being about a girl with telekinetic powers, Under the Dome being a dome is dropped on a town. So basically he takes these like very simple prompts and creates this dark, sinister world around it, and looks into the darker side of the human psyche and kind of like shows you what humanity is capable of. And it's always dark, it's always scary, it's always gruesome. So Under the Dome really took that and ran with it. This book could be by another author. It could be, look at humanity working together to survive. Instead, Stephen King says, look at humanity trying to tear themselves apart to survive. And I think it is really beautiful to see that. That's part of why I love Stephen King's books so much, is he does such a good job of just showing us how bad humanity can be. And I love it. I eat it up. Next up is Firestarter. This is one of his earlier books, and I think it's one of his less talked about books. And I think a lot of the reason I have it on my best of list is a lot of it is nostalgia. It was my first or second book I ever read of his, and I read it in like a day. I loved it. I thought it was so good. While I would say it's not his like most expertly crafted story or anything like that. It's not one of his big well-known ones. A lot of that nostalgia kind of influences my ranking of it on this list, but I still think it's a really great story. It's kind of similar to Carrie, only instead a girl can start fires with her mind. And it just kind of shows that like dark side of humanity again. There's like a running theme through all of his books, so I'll probably end up repeating myself a lot, but it just shows like how this girl uses this power of being able to start fires to help her, to protect her. She uses it in ways that are probably not considered good, but she's just trying to survive. So really love this book. Has a lot of nostalgia for me. I read it pretty young. I don't remember a whole lot about it other than the basic premise, but I still have this like really, really, it makes my heart warm just thinking about it. Like it gives me like this really great sense of nostalgia. So that's why I've included it on this list. Coming in at number 6 is another one I don't see people talking about as much, and that is Insomnia. This book is about what it says. It's about a man with insomnia. Again, very basic premise, but it really takes something so simple and so critical to human life, the ability to sleep. You need sleep to survive, and shows what happens when you can't. So this man obviously cannot sleep. He's tried everything. And he starts seeing these visions, and he basically like experiences all of these out-of-body experiences, and it is so dark. This one was one that was really, really scary. A lot of the ones that are like a lot of it is in their mind kind of thing scare me the most. This book was terrifying because most of the story, most of the stuff going on is in his mind because he cannot sleep. And it is just so dark, so gripping, very scary, super good. Again, Stephen King takes something so simple, such as not being able to sleep, and makes this terrifying story about just that one thing. And that is what is so masterful about his books. Like, if you read other horror, there's like jump scares, there's like the more classic, like The Shining. The Shining is more traditional horror in my head. But this one is just so nuanced and so simple, which makes it that much scarier because it's something that like could happen. Like, obviously there's some Stephen King twists, and there's like some stuff that obviously couldn't, but the basic premise of not being able to sleep and so then experiencing all of this stuff is very real, and people do experience weird stuff like this when they haven't slept for days. So it's just that's the scary part of it, is how real it feels. Next up is a less realistic one, and that is 11/22/63. This is one of his like always at the best of lists. This is one of his big books. It is it came out more recently than some of these others on his list. I think it came out in like the 2010s, I think. I don't remember. I read it I think in high school when it came out. Anyway, this is about a man who gets the opportunity to travel back in time and stop the assassination of JFK, which would in turn kind of change the dynamic of America. It is such a masterfully crafted book that I like couldn't put it down. And it's there's a reason it's in the best of lists everyone ever says. It is so well crafted. It sounds like a really corny book, and like time travel is normally not my thing. I'm normally not into time travel books because I think that they can be really convoluted. But he does such a good job with this book. And again, this is one I read a while ago and I don't remember a lot of the details, but it was just the whole plot flowed together so nicely. This one was less horror to me. Like it definitely felt a little less scary to me. But like the political like workings that go on in it, and there's like a romance that actually ends up being really well written. And I just think that the whole book in general is wonderful. These top 4 are the ones that I remember the most of, and it was very hard for me to rank these top 4. These are my favorite Stephen King books. I love them so much. Coming in at number 4 is technically a Richard Bachman book, which is his pen name. He has a few books out under Richard Bachman, and that is The Long Walk. Again, a very simple premise to a story. This town, every year or every few years, I don't remember, basically has this long walk where all these kids are just told to start walking until there's only one left. They can't stop walking or they are shot and killed. And they must try to survive. They must try to do like machinations to get other kids out. It is dark. It is grisly. It is, again, an expert exploration into the human psyche and how somebody would behave as they start to face starvation, exhaustion, like physical and mental exhaustion, dehydration. Like their bodies are being wrecked, and the desperation you start to feel in that circumstance is really beautifully portrayed in this book. It is hard to read at times. I mean, kids are literally being shot to death for stopping and for laying down, and just seeing some of these kids just like give up is so heartbreaking, and he does such a good job of showing that, and I love this book. It's also a shorter book, and it's one of the more twisted books, I think, because some of these obviously deal with a lot of really gross, awful things, but many of them feel like out of reach. Like they're very science heavy, like sci-fi-y or fantasy-like. This one is just forcing children to walk, and it's just so dark. So I definitely recommend this one if you have not read it. Next up, I have Desperation. This one is probably the scariest Stephen King book I've ever read. And I don't see this one on a lot of people's lists. And I think a lot of that is because it's probably not his most well-crafted book. But it was just so scary that I would have to close it sometimes and stop reading for a while because I just needed a break. Basically, it's like these people are driving through the middle of nowhere and get pulled over by a cop, and basically the cop kidnaps them and takes them to this like desolate town. And it just goes off from there. It is so scary, and it is so visceral. It's hard to put into words. I was terrified reading this book, and like, if I were ever in the middle of nowhere and a cop tried to pull me over, I would not pull over. I would call 911 and tell them I was driving to the nearest town, and then I would pull over in a well-lit, well-populated area. I would drive for hundreds of miles before I pulled over in the middle of nowhere for a cop. Like this book has done that to me. It was so scary. And this is one of the ones that's definitely more fantastical. There's a lot of like weird creatures and things like that. Like this one's definitely on the more fantastical side of Stephen King's books. But it is 3 on my list just because of how scary it was. Like, he writes horror. I read his books to be scared. This one was terrifying. My top 2 books are probably more like tied. I have ranked them, but it's really hard to decide which one I like better. What I've put at number 2 is Dune McKee. I think that my number 1 book is a more well-written book, and it's the classic number 1 Stephen King book, but Dune McKee, I think, was more enjoyable. It was easier to read and was just fantastic. I've heard very mixed reviews on this book. Some people love it, some people hate it. My brother hated it, my mom loved it. But I think that this book was so good. It's very different from his other books. Most of his books are set in Maine. This one is set in Florida. I believe it's Florida. It's on a beach. I'm pretty sure it's Florida. And it is just so good. It's about this man who is involved in a terrible construction accident and loses his arm. And it also kind of like scrambles his brain, and he has a very long road of rehabilitation ahead of him. His memory isn't very good. His speech isn't very good in the beginning. He's filled with anger. His marriage ends. He has 2 daughters who have a hard time talking to him because he's just so mad. So his therapist suggests that he move. And so he goes to a beach, and she asks him if there was something that used to bring him joy. And he said he used to sketch. So she says, why don't you do that again? So he goes out to this key called Duma Key and gets a house and starts sketching. He is kind of starting to heal with like the noises of the beach, and he's in this relaxing, quiet environment. And he's starting to slowly let go of some of this rage. And he starts creating art. And the things that are showing up in his art are confounding him. He is confused about what is showing up in his art. And then slowly these things start to become real. And it is so scary and so wonderfully written. I always wonder if part of the reason I love this book so much is because it's a different setting. It isn't the standard Stephen King small town in Maine kind of thing. Like it is very different setting and a very different story. But it is so magical. It is so good. It's scary, but it also, again, deals a lot with like the human psychology, things like that. And it is so good. Like, it was very hard to choose between this or my number 1 book. And they're probably more like tied. I think I probably enjoyed this one more, but I appreciate the other one more. I don't know. This book is phenomenal. And if you're a Stephen King fan and you haven't read it, I highly recommend you read it. This book is so good. And then coming in at number 1, no surprise to anyone, is The Stand. If you look at any best of Stephen King lists, like online, this is normally always number 1. It's always like this and The Shining and It. They're like always up there. 11, 22, 63 as well. Those ones are like always the top of his lists. And I get this one. This one makes a lot of sense to me. This book I read when I was in high school. It's huge. It's like 1,200 pages or something. And I read the mass market paperback, so like give me a pat on the back for holding that, because it's wild. It's like my Stormlight Archive mass market paperbacks. Like, why did they even create them? This book is dark and definitely something you should not read right now in the current environment without knowing what it's about. This book is about a flu that wipes out almost the entire human population, and it is just about the survival of the people that lived through it. It gets really dark, and this book kind of ties in a lot with his overall, he has like almost all of his books tie in some way to the Dark Tower series, which I have talked about the Dark Tower series in other videos. I've tried 2 separate times to read it, and they are bad. I don't like them. Anyway, so this one has a lot bigger ties to the Dark Tower series from what I understand. Again, didn't read all of them. I've read like 2.5 of the Dark Tower. But this book is phenomenal and dark and so well crafted. I've heard a lot of criticisms that there's a lot of drags in the story, and I will have to trust them because I read this so long ago that I don't remember any of the drags. So this might be my mind kind of gilding my reading experience, but I just remember finishing this book and being so in awe of what Stephen King was able to create with that story. And again, like all of these books, examining how humans react in survival instances, like how they deal with extinction events and things like that, is just so scary, so dark, and I love this book. Again, it was very hard to choose between this and Duma Key, because Duma Key, I feel like I have a much stronger memory of. I feel viscerally towards Doomuki. Like I remember my feelings. I remember distinct mental images of what went on in that book. Like that book has me in a death grip. It is so good. It is so good. So again, these books are both very good, and I understand some of the criticisms of Stephen King's work in general. He's not an author for everyone, and there are definitely some of his books I've read that I didn't like. I think he's got a lot of like problematic tropes in some of them, but some of them make sense why they're there, and some of them feel a little unnecessary. So again, he is not the author for everyone, but he is called the master of horror for a reason. He writes some really scary books, and I love reading scary books. So I highly recommend all the books on this list. I understand if some of these are not for everyone. Again, this was not an objective list by any means. This was not like, oh, this one was better written. Like, no. These are books that I love for personal reasons. So if you don't like any of these, that is totally fine. And that is my list. I hope you guys liked this video. Please comment down below and tell me what your favorite Stephen King book is. Give me like your top 1 or top 3 or something. Let me know some of your favorites, and let me know which ones you disagree about on this list. I know I left out The Shining. Sorry. I DNF'd it. Sorry. Maybe as an adult I will try to read it again, because I tried to read it in high school and it just, something wasn't clicking for me. So maybe I'll try to reread that one day. But yeah, that's my list. I hope you guys liked this video. Thank you for your support. If you like this video, please like, comment, and subscribe. If you really like my content, please hit the notification bell to be notified every time I post a new video. Thank you guys for your support. As always, it means the world to me, and until next time, thank you.